Once again, autumn arrives in the village. The days begin to grow shorter, the foliage of the trees yellows and falls before the cold breeze that descends from the peaks and pushes back the joy and warmth of summer, while the forests that cover the mountains gradually acquire a melancholic, even gloomy, aspect under the increasingly stormy skies that announce the first snows. And it is during these days, once again, that the village elders tell the same story to children and young people by the crackling fires of the fireplaces. For in the first days of autumn, the elders always remind us of the story of the lover's forest, and of the mist that often still lingers there, as a reminder of the unfortunate events of the past and a harbinger of the mystery that continues to grip the inhabitants of the valley. The elders recount with fearful voices that many years ago, two wealthy and prestigious families lived in the village. For generations, the two lineages had maintained a peaceful and cordial relationship, until a bitter and foolish dispute over land ownership ended up causing an irreconcilable and bitter enmity between the two families. But not even that animosity prevented one of the sons and one of the daughters from each of the feuding families from beginning a close friendship in their childhood. As the years passed and adolescence and young adulthood arrived, this friendship blossomed into a passionate romance, which, as one might imagine, was vehemently opposed by the parents and other relatives of both youngsters, blinded by their petty squabbles. On countless occasions, the two youngsters were harshly reprimanded by their parents, who often engaged in regrettable and scandalous arguments, much to the astonishment of the neighbors and the shame and distress of the two youngsters. It was these increasingly frequent encounters that led the two lovers to begin meeting secretly in the depths of a nearby forest, in order to circumvent their family's prohibitions and have moments of peace and intimacy away from prying eyes. The two youngsters sneaked out of their homes and met in some discreet spot on the edge of the woods, then venture into the thicket, walking peacefully among the shadowy, leafy trees while enjoying each other's company and delighting in the captivating, albeit dark, surroundings. They talked about themselves and their future, even planning to leave the village and its oppressive atmosphere and move to the city. Quite some time passed in this way, until one day, during one of those pleasant walks, the two protagonists of this story were surprised by the sudden appearance of a thick fog, denser and more overwhelming than any they had ever seen before. This gloomy miasma descended from the mountains and covered the forest with such speed and voracity that the youngsters had no time to leave the thicket, spreading in opaque spirals among the moss-covered trunks, making it difficult to distinguish even a hand at the end of an outstretched arm, and utterly impossible to see beyond. Fear and anguish gripped both youngsters, who held hands tightly, trying to comfort each other and barely maintain their composure, as they walked slowly through the grim and unsettling environment into which the forest, where they had shared so many happy moments, had so unexpectedly transformed. For a long time the lovers walked through the swirling mist and the unyielding tree trunks, trying in vain to leave the malevolent forest and return to the village. But the oppressive atmosphere and the dense fog made it impossible for them to identify landmarks and distinguish the features of the grove they thought they knew so well, to the point that the two youngsters felt as if they were walking through completely unfamiliar territory, and even that the landscape itself was inexplicably changing with their muffled steps. An unreal and ominous silence, even threatening, hung in the heavy, damp air, broken only by the nervous breathing of the two young people and soon by the occasional sobs of the girl, whom her companion tried to comfort, though even he felt his resolve crumbling with each step they took and being swallowed up by the voracious mist and the sinister shadows of the vegetation. But then, suddenly, as the couple walked hesitantly along a narrow, muddy path, the boy unexpectedly slipped and fell down the embankment beside him, disappearing from his companion's sight into the undergrowth and fog before she could do anything. Bewildered, the girl took a few seconds to grasp what had just occurred, and then she was overcome by terror and anguish. She ran desperately down the slope, ignoring the wounds inflicted by the thorny bushes, sobbing and calling out for her beloved again and again. For hours on end, the inconsolable young woman's anguished cries echoed as she searched for her companion, but only a grim silence answered her among the impassive flow of the mist, until finally even her mournful lament was swallowed up by the miasma that enveloped the forest, leaving behind an eerie silence and the dampness of the mist. The two youngsters' disappearance news caused a great commotion in the village. All the neighbors eagerly participated in the search, and even their distraught parents and other relatives finally put aside their now inconsequential squabbles and diligently collaborated in these efforts, searching obstinately for their children through fields and mountains, and through the sinister forest, tirelessly traversing it from one end to the other for weeks on end. But all those efforts were in vain, for no one could find the youngsters, nor any trace or clue as to their fate. Some murmured that perhaps they had gone to the city fleeing the intransigence of their families, but most of the locals inevitably turned their thoughts to the thick and unnatural fog that had covered the region on that fateful day, maintaining that this miasma must have caused them to become hopelessly lost in those rugged lands and perhaps fall into some unknown ravine or chasm. The fog, however, would return on several occasions to the area, especially to the ill-fated forest, and although there were no further disappearances, it gave rise to the whispered legend of the lovers in the mist and the forest in which they had vanished, a forest into which few now dared venture, particularly when the ominous mist descended from the mountains and spread among the watchful trees. For that miasma then claimed dominion over those gloomy places and did not like to be disturbed in its unknowable unfolding. Those who, out of inescapable obligation or foolish bravado, ventured into the sinister forest and defied the darkness and the dampness, swore with vivid fear, upon their return home, that they had experienced an inexplicable and oppressive anxiety within themselves as they walked among the unyielding trunks, that they had felt repelled and even assailed by the swirling fog. And notably, they recounted that now, among the undulating mist and tangled vegetation, ghostly whispering voices and disembodied wails could be heard, announcing the appearance of some solitary and shadowy figure that wandered erratically among the trees, without responding to any call, until it vanished into the thicket as unexpectedly as it had appeared. It wasn't long before word spread among the villagers, their voices still trembling from those unsettling apparitions, that these ethereal figures were the lovers in the mist, the ghosts of the girl and boy who had been separated and vanished into the fog that had once blanketed the forest. They only appeared when the mist returned to envelop that cursed woodland, calling out to each other and searching tirelessly, tormented by a sorrow deeper than the roots of the trees among which they wandered, yearning to reunite and consummate the love denied them by their foolish relatives and that vile miasma. Thus, only when the tormented souls of those two unfortunate young lovers were reunited would the inconsolable grief of the lovers in the mist finally end.